Hey y'all, I'm Sunita Iyer. I am one of your faculty members at the School of Nursing and Health Studies, and maybe I know some of you. Um, your instructor, Jen Segadelli, asked me to come in and talk a little bit with you about death and dying and some of the cultural implications of how people get to experience death and dying and grief, some of the intersections with identity and it might sound weird, but grief and death and dying are actually some of the things I really love to talk about. And I'll share some stories too. And it's possible I've actually seen some of you in electives that I've taught too on all of these exact topics. So, well, let's start with stories. That's kind of just where I like to start in general. I have actually had so many experiences with death and dying and grief, and I think it's part of the reason I like to talk about it, because personally, I have done a lot of work around grief. Have reached out for a lot of resources, a lot of support, and just sort of metabolized my own experience around that, and therefore then witnessed the ways that my own identity, the variety of cultures that I participated in and are raised by and influenced by have created the way that I get to grieve, but also the ways that I don't. So I'll share a little bit about that in this too. Not necessarily to make it about me, but just so that, I think sometimes personalizing an experience, being able to put it in your own life and like, how does this fit, right? Rather than just talking really academically about grief and death and dying can be helpful. So, I've had a lot of experiences, and the couple of experiences I'll share are specifically the death and dying and grief process of my best friend, which actually we were very recently able to celebrate, if that's the right word. And I think that kind of falls into this conversation as well. And then also the death of, numerous friends, but specifically my grandparents, just in terms of thinking about the way that other cultures, other people, other places in the world do death differently, and how that translates to what we're left with. So first of all, one of the things that I like to talk about before I get into the storytelling part is that death and dying with dignity is a privilege. Not everybody gets to do it. And where you see this in its purest form, because the key is we don't see a lot about death and dying and grief, right? It's very hidden from us, actually much like the way childbirth is. And by not being able to see these processes, we're also not able to see the indignities that people experience related to this. It is very clear, whether you're looking at data, whether you're looking at experiences, that people who have less, period, also experience less in childbirth, in their entry into the world, experience less health care in general over the course of their lives while they're still here, and then also experience less in their death. They experience less dignity in the process of dying, in terms of having pain relief withheld, not being able to qualify for assisted living or hospice care, and having to die in situations or with people who are not able to offer the care that they need to die, quote unquote, peacefully, in the way that many of us think about it, unless we've actually had to sit with the process of death, which, by the way, is peaceful, and it's also really brutal. Having sat literally holding the hands of people as they've died, including my best friend, it's not as charming as people make it out to be. There is a peace when it resolves someone's suffering and deep pain, and it is also the end to vitality, right? And when you end vitality, whether abruptly or gradually, it is the end of that life is marked. It is not something that just passes like with nobody else noticing. And that's the thing, right? Is that when people die, they are passing on their vitality. And yet we don't see, witness, respect, or celebrate the loss of that vitality of that person. It's not simply remembering their accomplishments or their achievements, but their actual being. If I don't happen to have a belief system that is consistent with, like say reincarnation or the passage of a soul, or that something happens to that. I'm not excluding it from my thinking. I just don't. It's not a firm belief of mine, and that has no bearing on whether or not that should be of yours. But that can sometimes be one of the places where people experience relief, because it feels like, okay, that vitality isn't lost, right? It's transferred. On some level, that is not inherently untrue either, right? Because energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Mass can neither be created nor destroyed from the laws of physics. So it is possible, at least from a physics standpoint, and that maybe that appeals to me. Maybe it's entirely too academic for this topic. That people, something happens to them next. I don't know what it is. But the actual process of it is far more brutal than that. For many people. And most people do not get to witness that brutality, celebrate that brutality, or have that brutality received in any way that is gentle by anyone. And that is an indignity in and of itself. Most people do not get that privilege. Most people in this country die alone. Many people die impoverished, partly by their financial status going into older age and death and dying, but also potentially their age, their level of income, and potentially their living situation that they're in. But many people die alone, and most people still die in facilities, whether it's in hospice care, in hospitals, or assisted living facilities, nursing homes. So not only do they die alone, they die around strangers, and very often to the sound of beeps, and then the lack thereof, surrounded by wires, bright lights, an audience. And I want you to think about that. I really want you to put yourself in that situation. Like, if you are leaving this earth, you are losing your vitality. Would you like to do that in a hospital bed under bright lights connected to beeping equipment? And I want you to consider that for yourselves, and consider what would feel more respectful, dignified, resonant, desirable for you, right? Because if you can get a sense of that, then you can get a sense of, gosh, probably most of these people are dying this other way. And most of those people who are most people don't want to go this way. So when we talk about, like, what are the cultural implications, we have a culture, a medical culture in our society right now that creates this process for people. So what is the cultural implication of heavy medical intervention and medical presence as you lose your vitality and leave this world in your current form? I would love for folks to think about that more, and for us to consider, much like what we see happening in the birth world, some sort of revolution. Maybe that's not how people experience dignity or how they would like to. And maybe there are ways that we can change that, in terms of policy. There are still policies on the books in most states that you cannot have human remains buried in your yard. That includes placentas. It also includes people. So you can offer your animals a death at home, on your couch, in your arms, but you can't offer that to your mother. That speaks very highly of who we are as a society and a culture. So think about that for a second.